Tonight I want to talk about stacking the judiciary, putting enablers in at the Justice Department, co-opting and grabbing ownership of the media, demonizing immigrants and the LGBT community. If that sounds like Project 2025, what I'm talking about might have been called Project 2010. And the country was not the United States, but Hungary. Tonight, let's talk about Viktor Orbán.
But highly intelligent guy, very strong person from Hungary. He's the head of Hungary. A very great head of a country. Viktor Orbán, one of the most respected men. They call him a strong man. He's a tough person, smart. Prime Minister of Hungary.
So Viktor Orbán becomes a member of the Hungarian parliament in 1990. And by 1998, he becomes the prime minister. 4 years later, he suffers a stinging defeat, and he vows that if he returns to power, he will never leave power again. That has become all too prophetic, as we have seen the dramatic transformation of Hungary from democracy to something called an electoral autocracy. Hungary sadly provides a model for how to turn a democracy into something else by attacking it from within, not by a revolution, not by a foreign invasion, but rather by suborning the laws, the procedures, the institutions of the country from within. So let's look at Viktor Orbán and what he has done to Hungary. So the attack on the democratic institutions in Hungary began with an attack on the justice system and the judges. So they began by changing the law, reducing the mandatory retirement age for judges, which essentially forced hundreds of judges out of office, out of the bench. And then, of course, Orbán got to fill these judgeships, to put in judges who would be responsive not to the law in Hungary, but to the person of Viktor Orbán. So he essentially stacked the judiciary. At the same time, he stacked the Justice Department, Hungary's Justice Department, putting in his own sycophants and enablers, people who would not hold him to account for Hungary's growing corruption. And in fact, under Orbán's so-called leadership, Hungary has become the most corrupt country in the EU, ranking dead last when it comes to transparency. In addition to going after judges, the judiciary, and the justice system, one key part of dismantling Hungary's democracy has been the remaking of the entire media in Hungary, which used to be a robust media environment in which you had opposition media and party media. But what we have seen under Orbán is a lot of Orbán's wealthy cronies have increasingly bought out independent media and turned them into essentially state-run media, propaganda media for the Fidesz party and Viktor Orbán. You have seen oligarchs purchase social media and increasingly use social media to essentially put out the Orbán message. In addition to social media, you've seen Orbán's wealthy oligarchic friends purchase the traditional media, television and radio, and essentially turn Hungary into a one-party state-run media. Also, the resources of the Hungarian government go to feed this oligarch-led media. So basically, the oligarchs purchase the media, Orbán and his ruling Fidesz party then pay back the oligarchs by using state resources to advertise on that state propaganda channels and network. So they've corrupted the media. The people in Hungary just get one message. Now, what is that message? Well, that message won't be all that surprising to you. That is, Orbán is the populist looking out for average Hungarians and fighting this cabal of elites. So it is the populist, anti-elitist message that probably sounds very familiar to Americans. And this is propped up by this oligarchic and state-run media. But not just an anti-elitist message, it is also an anti-LGBT message. Orbán is demonizing the gay community in Hungary. He is also demonizing the immigrant community in Hungary, lashing out at immigrants, lashing out at other countries. It is the same kind of xenophobic brand of populism that has become all too familiar, not just to Americans, but to people residing in autocratic regimes all over the world. So he has remade the Hungarian media, he has remade the Hungarian judiciary and justice system, but he is also attacking the electoral system in Hungary by changing the constitution, allowing, for example, the parties in Hungary to pick the politicians. So the voters don't get the choice of politicians in Hungary, the parties get to decide who can run in elections, which essentially makes Viktor Orbán the kingmaker. If you want to be a politician, if you want to run for office, you need to get on a party list. That means you need the approval of Viktor Orbán and his Fidesz party. So they are remaking how the electoral system works. They have essentially gerrymandered, jury-rigged the system so that he can enjoy supermajorities in the parliament, which he has now for the last decade. They're also engaging in fraud, they're engaging in vote rigging, they're engaging in interference in the counting of votes, they're encouraging foreign interference in the vote, so they're attacking the infrastructure of elections as well. And what Hungary has become under this Fidesz and Viktor Orbán leadership is a failed democracy, something else, not quite a democracy anymore. But what has gone hand in hand with the loss of democracy in Hungary has been the rise of corruption. The rule of law is going and gone, corruption is way up, and as corruption has increased, as the oligarchs have gotten richer, as Viktor Orbán's childhood friend has become one of the richest people, a former pipe fitter, one of the richest people in the country by virtue of the graft facilitated by Viktor Orbán, the economy has cratered. Hungary's economy has been in free fall. And this, too, is the pattern we see where you lose a democratic governance, you have a corrupt regime, an oligarchic regime. Essentially, you are pillaging the resources of the country to enrich a few oligarchs, and the rest of the country are suffering. So that is the bleak situation in Hungary. And it might be surprising that with such a poor economic performance as Hungary, with such a collapse of the rule of law, that the United States of America would be holding up Hungary as the great example. But this is exactly what Donald Trump and the Republican Party are doing. CPAC, which is this conservative political action convention committee, hosts these events in the United States. They're now hosting them in places like Hungary. And in fact, recently at the CPAC convention of Hungary, this is what Viktor Orbán had to say.
We need the dissolution of the transatlantic deep state, the closure of the American-Brussels liberal coalition. We need the closure of the American liberal monopoly. That is, the European and American patriots need each other.
So there's Viktor Orbán proud of the fact that they are tearing down the democracy, that they've established what he calls an illiberal democracy, and that he is making sure that the power is increased, their grip on that power is cemented, and he hopes for all time. This is a movement that the Trump administration is supporting in other countries. Of course, it goes hand in hand with idealizing different autocrats around the world. But the Trump administration, contrary to how the United States has conducted itself previously, is going from country to country to country to celebrate the far-right parties, to help them essentially install themselves irrevocably in power. I was at the Munich National Security Conference in February. It's the preeminent national security conference anywhere in the world. And there our own Vice President J.D. Vance raised not the threat to Ukraine from a Russian invasion, as I think most of the members of the conference were eager to discuss, but instead posited that the primary threat to Europe was European self-censorship. That is, Europe trying to marginalize these far-right and including fascist parties.
The threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America.
Indeed, while J.D. Vance was at that conference, he met not with the German chancellor, but with the head of one of these far-right parties. And the same is true of Kristi Noem and other cabinet members as they go to Poland and other countries to try to champion the far-right leaders and essentially campaign for them in violation of all diplomatic protocols in the past. This is the United States inserting itself in the political process and the elections of other countries to try to create essentially a community of failed democracies led by Donald Trump. So these are the warning signs that we see in Hungary. We see in Hungary the model for how to destroy a democracy from within. And to fight back against this in the United States, we have to take on each of these areas where they're undermining our institutions. We have to push back against their effort to interfere with the elections process, these efforts at the state level to install partisan elections boards and empower them to overturn the results, the effort to intimidate and shape and take over and capture the media of the United States that begins with forcing ABC to capitulate and CBS to capitulate, the LA Times and the Washington Post to capitulate, but that continues with oligarchic ownership of Twitter pushing out a right-wing message, or the Fox empire or Newsmax and all their efforts to trumpet this right-wing propaganda. It continues with removing anyone of independence, firing prosecutors at the Justice Department, installing enablers, the Emil Boveys, the Pam Bondis, the Todd Blanches. We have to fight back against each of these efforts to undermine our institutions, to use the power of the public purse to allow propaganda announcements by Kristi Noem or notices going out to Social Security recipients trumpeting the merits of that big, ugly bill. So we've seen the playbook. It's not just in writing in Project 2025, but we've seen it in practice in Viktor Orbán and Hungary. We know what we're up against, and we need to fight it tooth and nail.